Hello and welcome to Beyond the Veil background information. Today we're going to talk about the night predators, or the night hunters, a cultural concept in the Veil universe. Okay, let's begin. It's something you'll have to learn and accept soon enough, Exley. The old days of the night predators or night hunters mean nothing anymore. Indeed, though you are considered a bat, it is the fox that rules this land, and you'd better get in line quick. Quote from Rodrigo in Tatzelworm. Known as night predators, night hunters, or the Dark Eight, the night predators are the big 8 groups of beings in the Veil that were considered more demonic in nature, lived off others, and regularly battled each other over power, only to be subjugated beneath the vampires. They are all beings born naturally in the Veil and are not demons, although to those beyond the Veil some of them may indeed seem very demonic. They have always held high positions in the Veil because of their violent nature, and it was not until the late 1800s, when the Veil agents came to the fore, that their powers were broken, and even then the vampires still sat above everyone. Now, the night predators are named for an odd bunch of reasons, and these include 8 animals that hunt at night, and are said to represent these groups. They are, number 1, the bat, number 2, the wolf, number 3, the owl, number 4, the snake, number 5, the fox, number 6, the cat, number 7, the spider, and number 8, the scorpion. Some of these names will match up to what you'd expect, but some might surprise you, and in this list it actually tells you the level of power between them all. However, number 2, the wolf, is the only one unique in actually representing the lowest of the low within the Veil, and only its physical ability puts it in the second position. I'm going to go over these 8 beings as briefly as possible and their relationships with one another, but the inspiration for these beings is simple. They're all common choices for characters in paranormal romance books and things that freak me out. But I will also note that the owl, although named for the actual species it represents, I later included it in this list because of the cryptic beings Owlman and Mothman, which actually play a good variation between these beings, but let's get into it. The bat. The bat represents the vampire, the sophisticated solitary night hunter that can live with others to fight if needed, but moves in stealth to gather its meal and has no qualms whom it feeds from. With the ability to turn into a more monstrous-looking bat, let alone being immortal compared to the other beings, the vampire is the top of the group because everyone knows it is only 1 inch from being a demon. Its hypnotizing, seducing, and increased speed and strength keep it above the rest despite their desires to fight it. The vampire recruits all the others to work for them, and by doing so is even more powerful, but in later years the positions of the wolf and the owl and the fox became troublesome. In truth, the wolf has always been a rival to the bat because the being is cursed, not necessarily born that way, and the vampire may treat it like a servant or a pet kept mad, and this historic master and servant relationship has always kept their relationship soured. As for the owl, they used to be the ones to bring in the food for the lazy vampires to feed from before being permitted the drained carcass, but with the owl developing more sophistication, resentment grew, and they strove to remove vampires through their own addiction, creating drugs similar to opiates and breaking free to be a constant rival. The same is true of the fox, but it only ever became successful within the Spanish-speaking regions of the Veil, where the fox threw the vampires out of the Iberian Veil to take hold, and were always more willing to travel and found themselves going across to the Americas, where there were no natural vampires. The wolf. Rather obvious, this is regarding the werewolf. The most piteous being in the Veil that all beings of the Veil pity and despise, a being that might as well be considered an animal for its uncontrollable animal instinct. But whether born a werewolf or bitten, and at risk of the hideous rabies-like disease called Metzger, the werewolf is treated as garbage because it represents the true duality of the Veil and beyond it, the innocent and the culprit. Always in search of some safety where it could be controlled or gain some kind of life, the werewolf was quickly pulled into the service of the vampire and given food, comfort, and security, not always knowing that they were sent to kill and destroy enemies, for their savagery meant they would attack even vampires and demons without care. But in later years, when the Veil agents began to spread the word that the werewolves were their own masters and they could be taken to special houses during the moon to get on with the pack and practice a hunt in security, knowing they were not killing men, the werewolves began to pull away. In 1820 there was a violent war between the werewolves of Scandinavia against the vampires, and in doing so they wiped the vampire out of the Nordic countries, which has remained free of vampires but overrun by another night predator instead. The werewolf, though, has taken until the 1960s and 70s to gain any respect or help with the development of the howling and their proper ability to have legal representation, something spearheaded by Malvolio Viper, the Vampire King. The owl, representing the Strix mainly, but including other bird-like meat-eating beings like the harpy, griffin, siren, aethon, porus, and stymphalian beings, for example, but mostly by the man-eating owls that can sometimes take form similar to a woman with owl features. The Strix are intelligent, powerful, and yet have always been maligned for being the sort to kidnap and devour children of other beings left outside, let alone anyone not being careful and lounging outside in the evening. Their ravenous hunger has kept them from being considered a benevolent being by any circle, and even into the latter half of the 20th century, the Strix and its fellow bird people have yet to be pulled into the Veil narrative as benevolent beings. They often worked as assassins, food bringers, and even decoys for their vampire masters, who found it easy to control them through seductive voices, as all in the owl category are lured in by interesting voices. It was because of this and the lack of respect, despite the fact they could have rivaled them as night predators, that the Strix began to focus on chemistry and science, many taking the roles of the mad scientist in the vampire's castle, trying to create, but actually constantly sabotaging whatever the vampire wanted. It was through this that they developed the drugs that would have devastating effects on the vampire youth, with many young males dying, especially in the 80s when the drugs were at their greatest strength and availability. But sadly for the actions of the Strix, even now most of the owl are not looked at pleasantly. The snake, also referred to as the serpent or echidnae, these are the half-snake, half-human or nymph beings that can often be more benevolent like the naga than malevolent like the pythene. Always taking the form of healers and entertainers, the serpent or the night predators only rarely ate human flesh, but for their poisonous nature have been a source of fear, especially for the European species. Though servants in most nations, in island countries and indeed in India, they have always held a very high position and been seen as separate from the other night predators, but most often they were the peacemakers and the in-betweeners for the other Veil species and the vampire, although they were also known as the assassins. Even after the Veil agents were helping create Veil lore, the serpents were being kept on a position as neutral to all around them. Although Europeans have remained suspicious, in the old days there were barely any harsh comments about these beings, whose intelligence was more revered than their venom. The fox. Due to the trickster nature of the fox shapeshifters in nearly all cultures, the shapeshifter species in general has always been referred to as the fox, and this has meant a lot of prejudice for those creatures within. Though non-predatory shapeshifters have often been treated with appreciation, and the feline shapeshifters seen with beauty, the canine shapeshifters have always had to battle over the mistakes between them and werewolves, and the risk of being treated like crap to the weasel, raccoon, and smaller predatory shapeshifters that are more stuck with the trickster label that the most famous but most magic tribe, the kitsune, placed upon their kind. In fact, it should be said that the shapeshifter is a being that can change their shape at will, but can only go from human to animal. There is no in-between, and no fox standing on its hind legs saving the elder magic tribe, like the previously mentioned kitsune. With their ability to spy by imitating wildlife, and the fact they were only just above an ordinary human with no other power, nor indeed the invulnerability or long lives of the other species amongst the night predators, the shapeshifters would often be referred to as traitors to the non-demonic, because they pandered to the vampires and the other predators to save their own skins, even taking roles like taxmen and administration or governors over own provinces, or even the policemen to treat the non-predators with infamy. However, it would be in the werewolf wars that the shapeshifter would mingle with the humans of the Veil and invoke the aid of the Mastema to create the Veil agents of justice. Thanks to this, the shapeshifters developed just the common people of the Veil, and though there were still prejudices for the species they turned into, their feline brethren are treated with reverence, for they rise up against the vampire nobility of the Iberian Veil, and removing the vampires from it completely until the late 90s, when turned and young vampires of more modern heritage were permitted in. The cat. The cat, not representing the feline shapeshifter, actually represents something very unique amongst Veil politics: the were-lions, were-leopards, were-jaguars, and were-tigers. Beings that are born into the Veil and cannot pass on a curse like werewolves, but instead perform a sacrifice or a demonic ceremony to gain their powers purely for the sake of battle. Once well renowned for the cult of Sekhmet, their bloodlust in battle placed them amongst the night predators. They were the dominant beings of the Central and South American Veils, as well as the African Veil, where they would work alongside vampires or without them. Famously, the were-jaguar is still the dominant species of Central America, but they were often hired in Africa and Europe, the were-lions and leopards particularly, to work as the warriors and guards of the vampires. Of all the species to break away from the vampire after the Veil agents changed the Veil, the cat were the only ones to truly regret the loss of the vampire's power, and from it a steady paycheck, and they often found that outside of vampire courts their places in Europe in particular were non-existent, with most being humans of colour outside of their shifting. The racist tone of white Europe put them down beneath the cat shapeshifters, and most departed from the European Veil completely, which is why they are rarely talked about, and make a point to be differentiated from the Iberian cat. The spider. The spider represents two groups of people: the spider people who catch humans in webs to devour them, or to mate them and devour them, sometimes called the mantis type, and the hair trappers, beings that use their hair instead of a web to catch, or use their hair to digest whatever they seek. With their excellent skills, beautiful looks, ability to dance, sing, and play music, the spider has always been hailed as the most regal and beloved of all the night predators. Though their link to the arachnids has often meant that there is caution around them, to witness a spider dance or entertain is still considered the height of sophistication and expense, and though mostly Asiatic in nature, and suffering the same issues of racism as the cats in later years, the spiders also held an honoured but gentle role in the service of the vampire, and indeed were protected from suspicion in the vampire courts. They often were kept as lovers to vampires, and yet, despite the fact they were more willing to live off blood like vampires rather than trap their prey, the Veil agents ended up treating them badly, and now all spiders are under a kind of constant watch, with records kept as regularly on their movement as on demons and the scorpions. Spiders are rare now. They try to keep themselves out of trouble and out of sight, but if in trouble, they always seek vampire help and always get it. The scorpion. Not a scorpion being as you might think, but rather a term used in the Veil for someone considered so dark in nature that they cannot help but be evil. Think of the story of the scorpion and the frog. This term is held almost exclusively for the Mara, the Scandinavian wolf-headed witch. Though at times it has also been used for other witches and warlocks, it is mainly linked to the Mara and their devil-worshipping, and their ability to make objects that can inflict the werewolf curse upon others. Always kept as the vampire's personal witch due to their superstitious nature, the Mara maintained practices of human sacrifice and hideous torturous actions to use their powers as given by the demonic mistress Astaroth. For worshipping a demon specifically, they were always maligned by the Veil and hated, enjoying their power with the vampires and willing to hurt anyone. However, when the werewolf wars took over, the Mara sided with the werewolves, hoping they could take over, and for a little while they did indeed take hold until the Berserker and Valkyrie turned on them. The Maras, though, maintained steady battle, and the battle in the Nordic countries against the Mara has continued since the Mara began to torture trolls and the Huldra became part of the Nordic Veil Council. Of all the night beings and the night predators, the Mara is the name still spat about in the Veil. That's the night predators for you. All of them really interesting in their own way, and hopefully I'll take some time to focus more on them in my species videos, so you get to hear more about them. And to be fair, they also need a bit more story time of their own. Thank you very much for listening, and of course, thank you to all my patrons.